Hi everyone, welcome back to SmugMug Live for another episode here on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you be part of this episode. We're going to be joined in a moment by David Grover from Capture One, but as always, a few shout outs at the beginning for a few things that you can do to help support this channel. As always, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button and hit the little bell notification. That way you'll be notified of every episode that we have released here on SmugMug Live. I would also ask you to give us a shout out in the chat window. It's always nice to see who is joining us today and let us know what part of the world you're joining from. That is always fun to see how geographically spread we can get all the people in the chat window. That would be fun to hear where you're joining from. So give us a shout out in the chat window. I'm going to talk to David Grover today about the latest release of the Capture One software and learn about all the cool stuff and all the new features in there. At any point while I'm talking to Dave, post a question in the chat window. I'll be sure to ask Dave those questions, and we'll see how it goes, and we'll kind of feed off your questions today. So today's with Dave, and Thursday I've got another episode this week, which is going to be an awesome episode. I'm going to be joined by the wonderful Matthew Jordan Smith, an amazing celebrity fashion and portrait photographer. He's going to join us on Thursday. It's an early one because he is joining us all the way from Tokyo in Japan. So trying to juggle all the time zones. For those of you West Coast US, you're going to have to get up early and join us at 7 a.m. on the West Coast. At 10 a.m. on the East Coast and 3 p.m. here in the UK. So it's a bit earlier one, but hopefully you'll enjoy that one. And if you can't get out your beds to watch that, then of course you can always watch all the episodes here on our YouTube channel. So let's see if Dave is there. David, are you with us? You are. Hey buddy, how are you?
Pretty good, yourself?
Good to see you.
Likewise.
So you keeping well?
Very well, yes,
Good.
definitely.
Good. Well, it's exciting to have you on here. We've got lots of people joining us in the chat, desperate to hear about all this cool shit that you're going to tell us. We couldn't think of a good title, so we just said cool stuff in Capture One. So let's see who we've got. Well, we've got some friends in the channel. We have our dear friend Emily Teague says hello from Brooklyn. She's in Brooklyn, New York. Emily is going to be joining us this time next week, I think.
Really?
This time next week, Emily. You will be live here on SmugMug Live, so tune in for that. We have Randy Pollock, who's a frequent guest here. He's from Tennessee. We've got Dick, who's joining us from South Wales.
Nice.
And Cameron Weir says, good evening, Alastair and David, from an overcast stone house in Scotland. Typical Scottish weather. I wouldn't know. Don't know what that means. Looks out the window and checks. Yeah, it's pretty standard.
Looks sunny.
Standard weather. We have Miguel from Valencia in Spain. We've got and Stefan from Canada. So quite an international crowd already today. Keep those comments coming in. We love to hear what part of the world you're joining us from. I can't say there's a prize for those of you that are furthest away from Dave and I, but we will love to hear it. We've got Adna already here from Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates. Hey, Adna, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. David, where are you at the moment?
I'm actually just outside of London at the moment. Still working from home because of the obvious. But I'm kind of well set up for it. So it's just business as usual for me. But normally, like you, I'm traveling all over the place, everywhere. And we haven't done that since, when did we see each other? In February, yeah.
Yeah, we last saw each other in Las Vegas when we attended a trade show in Vegas. So we haven't seen each other for a few months, but we have spoke fair bit here on the internet, and I have to give a shout out and a thanks to David, because prior to the pandemic and us all being at home, we hadn't been doing a live episode, and SmugMug Live owes a lot of thank you to David, who really helped us get set up with all the technology, because it's kind of what you do full time, right? You're kind of head of education at Capture One, right?
But also same with us, that we done a kind of live stuff with webinars that I do at least 2 or 3 times a month. But that's it wasn't quite as spontaneous as what we're doing now. And you had to register and all those kinds of things. But the pandemic kind of sort of kicked us up the backside to try to do more live things like this, and just going straight to YouTube, straight to Facebook, both at the same time, and then even streaming to 3 destinations. So the benefit, if there is a benefit of being stuck at home, is that it kind of gave us some inspiration to do things a bit different. So, which we will continue to do as well.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's the whole foundation of Capture One was Capture One. Of course, SmugMug Live was trying to keep chatting to all our community and keep people engaged and kind of keep people connected within the industry. And we're fortunate, as we said at the start of the show, to typically meet each other around the world. There's people in the chat that we get to see around the world as we're traveling as well. But the technology's there, and we're glad that we're able to bring you this show. And I'm sure this show will continue long after we're able to travel more.
It's something that we want to continue doing as well at Capture One. Probably not at the same frequency that we did in the past, because it's not necessarily always possible to sustain it. But going live quickly a couple of times a week, or just for special events, or going live from an event, is something that could be fun as well, to bring events to people who can't necessarily turn up.
Yeah, going live from trade shows and stuff, it sounds really compelling, but you and I know how difficult it is to stream live with the tech that we have here, and it's still difficult, and it's still sometimes get a little bit interesting when we have power cuts and
we need a 5G antenna strapped to our back or something like that.
But maybe we can find a way to to make it happen. Emily, who obviously we meet up when we're at the trade shows in the US, she says she wishes she could go back to Vegas. I don't want to go back to Vegas just quite yet. I do miss you, and I wish we could be in Vegas, but it's definitely not the first place on my to-do list while we're still under a pandemic. No offense to anybody in Vegas.
Yeah. I'm amazed we got out of there with our health intact, actually.
Well, and typically when you're at trade shows, they're not the healthiest place in the world at any time. Normally you get the convention bugs. I mean, you're shaking hands with so many people, you're interacting, all day long. You're at parties, you're at after show events. So you normally get
the Capture One ice luge as well.
Yeah, if you go to the right party, you get to drink out an ice luge that Capture One sponsored this year, but I went nowhere near that. I'm not drinking out an ice luge even when there's no pandemic. But we managed to get out of Vegas this year in pretty good condition, and then got back to our homes, and it's all been downhill since then. So very grateful to make it home and to be safe and well. Absolutely. And I hope everybody who's joining us is safe and sound today, wherever you are in the world. So let's get to the reason why we have you here, is to let all the people joining us today learn about some of the cool stuff that you have in Capture One. Now, I am sure within the audience there's all levels of experience when it comes to Capture One. Most of us have probably maybe dabbled in it, some live in it, some are very experienced in it, but we'd like to maybe start with what are the new features? You have a fairly new release of Capture One, Capture 120. So maybe you can start showing us about some of the new things that are there. What I would ask the audience, while you're watching, if you have questions about Capture 120, just post them in the comment. I'll be sure to pester Dave for the next hour with all those questions. And he says there's nothing you can ask him that he doesn't know about Capture One.
I'm sure there is.
Well, there's a goal. So let's see if we can stump Dave today. But
I'm sure there is, definitely.
Yeah. So let's look at some of the cool things, and then we'll kind of take it from the questions, and we maybe go down a few tangents and stuff over the next hour. But over to you, Dave, if you want to kick things off. Shall I jump to your screen?
Yeah. Bring my screen up. That would be good. I've just picked out a bunch of photos for no particular reason, but just to have some other stuff. Actually, as Emily's watching, I'll steal some of her pictures as well. Let's just grab a few of these too. So yeah, we had Capture One, which came out just at the end of last year. And really, this release was kind of a bit different to other releases, or at least the past two releases have been much more focused about listening to the customer, which, if I'm honest, we weren't as good as doing that in the past. It's always very difficult to know what to put in to the next release of Capture One, because we have a to-do list, this long, or at least a request list this long. So it's always tricky to strike a balance between what to put in, which has the biggest impact or the biggest benefit to who's using it. Quite often, what looks good on paper is not necessarily what's interesting to you guys and girls out there listening as well. So this release was really kind of targeted to what does the customer want, and what can we put in it to benefit them the most and to benefit the broadest range. So with that in mind, that kind of created Capture 120 as you see it today. There's no shortage of tools or ways of doing things in Capture One. So we also try to think about the accessibility, the startup process, getting to know it a bit easier, and so on as well. So that's kind of the ethos behind it, if you like, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
So rather than kind of go through every single new thing, I would say let's open up one of Emily's pictures. Why not? The biggest thing that was added, really, let's just get rid of this heel layer. Capture One, obviously, its primary task has always been to take your raw file and convert it, do your color editing, exposure, adjustments, all the typical things you would do in a raw converter, and then you export to your final formats, JPEG TIFF, and then you can carry on and retouch in your chosen pixel editor, which 9 times out of 10 we assume is probably going to be Photoshop. But of course, there's other applications like Affinity Photo coming along as well, which are kind of snapping at the heels of Adobe. But what we wanted to do to kind of bridge that gap a little bit and to cover a lot of situations was to improve on the retouching side of things. Capture One has always had quite a strong emphasis on working with layers, and we can, I'm sure, if there's time, Alastair, we can have a little look at that as well. But just kind of sneaking over to the layers panel here, if I just grab this brush, this gives us the ability to do just really quick healing of blemishes, marks, or even actually much bigger objects. So on a shot like this, she's got great skin anyway, but it's a really simple task just to find any of blemishes that you want to get rid of and just quickly zap away. Capture One will automatically find or at least suggest the right spot for you. But if you're not happy with what it picks, we can always pick up the little orange circle and then decide on a different spot. But it's really fast, really simple. It removed a big limitation from the previous version of Capture One. That it sounds kind of crazy when you talk about it now, but if you wanted to heal something on a photo, you could only have one source point. So on this particular shot, if I'd healed this spot here, or let's just take this one over here, Capture One picks this source point, and then it would have had to use that same source point for every other spot on that particular layer. Now it's totally unlimited. So that lifted a massive limitation, which meant you always kind of had to do a round trip into Photoshop. Now, if you have a simple retouching job, like on this particular shot, then it's very easy just to go over and just blitz any of the marks that you need to.
Yep. I'm assuming these things are all non-destructive as well.
Yeah, all non-destructive as well. So that's a really good point, because if I did have to round trip into Photoshop, then I'm losing my ability to edit the raw data.
Yep.
And with a shot like this, for example, if I then decide, I just need to tweak the exposure, the contrast, or whatever, as we already have done on this shot, then all of the little healing points I've done just carry along with it, because it's just part of that non-destructive workflow. So it's not something I have to consider oh, I need to do this at the end of my editing. I need to do, any clever tricks to make sure that if I change my exposure, that my healing points are going to follow along with it. It's all totally automatic. So we could even kind of, if I just do a big brush, there's a little crease in the background up there. So as well as small stuff, we could use it to fix those kinds of things as well. So great for retouching, great for blemishes, getting rid of manhole covers in street scenes, getting rid of people, all that kind of stuff.
So it's definitely able to do some of the heavy lifting as well that you used to have to do that round trip to Photoshop for in the past.
So just to save you that going to Photoshop back again, which is an extra step, takes time. You lose the ability to work on the raw file. This way I've got all the flexibility and work with the raw data. I can also change the opacity of my layers too. So if you just want to blend healing in on a few different layers, or like remove, say, some dark tones under the eyes, then that's something else you can easily achieve as well. So it's a massive improvement over the past.
Excellent. That's a cool feature. It's a beautiful image as well, Emily.
Yep.
Beautiful image. Thanks for letting us use that, even though you didn't know we were going to use it. No, she has given us.
She's here,
Yeah.
And based on that, of course, another option which people always wanted to have, and again, it's like a tiny feature, but it has a big impact. Just the ability to quickly see a before and after, which was possible on Capture 12, but it wasn't quite as slick as having this nice little
you
before
can choose
and after.
exactly where you want the image to split. That's pretty cool. So you could split it right down that eye or something. Yeah. And can you zoom in on that mode as well?
Yeah. You can zoom in as well. So if I just go to 100%, we can do so. Oh, nice. And then we can actually scroll the image around behind it, or we can drag the slider. And the nice thing is, if we have more than one image up, let's just fit them down, then we can scroll them all independently as well, which is pretty nice. So it's kind of a before and after, but also on steroids as well. And if you don't like the slider, you can just have a normal run-of-the-mill split view as well. But a normal run-of-the-mill full view as well. But the split view is actually quite nice for doing that sort of little quick check on skin tones, see what it's doing with the color tones, and so on.
I like the idea of having multiple images up so that you can see things like, color grading and all that kind of stuff across multiple images, and you can see the before and afters and make sure you've got a good balance in a set of images.
Exactly. Cool. So on this sequence, even though these two are the same, it's just two different edits. But if I had a fourth in the shot, or Emily had a fourth in the shot, she was trying to balance exposure, color grading, and so on, then it's easy just to tile up 4 shots, pick this one, do a little tweak, pick this one, let's just brighten that a touch, and so on, so you can get kind of that story and that flow going as well. So that's like a tiny feature, but it's again, it's not like a big whiz bang super impressive something adjustment tool or whatever, but as a workflow tool, it's just really nice to be able to tile several photos up. Now, even though I'm on a relatively small display here, but if we wanted to go up to 16, I think the maximum is, then you can just keep tiling those shots up as well, especially if you have working on bigger screens too.
Yeah, we're already getting loads of questions coming in, but I think I will let you do a few more highlights of some of the new features, and then I'll come to your questions. Those of you in the chat asking questions, you can do me a huge favor by starting your question with the word question. That way I can easily find them in the feed. Thank you to the likes of Randy and Roger that are already doing that. It's a great help. But I'm not ignoring your questions. We'll just let Dave talk about a few more features and then we'll get to the questions. And some of them look really tricky. It's great.
Uh-oh. It is, past my bedtime. So. Okay, so Capture One, I think it's fair to say it has a good reputation for its raw conversion abilities. So the kind of the first representation you get of your shot on screen is, good colors, it's good start point, and so on. So we feel you shouldn't have to fiddle around with getting the right colors. It looks good out of camera. Noise reduction is spot on. Sharpening is spot on as well. Now, when it comes to color, that's obviously a fairly big foundation of photography. So the ability to manipulate color is also really important. It's kind of one of the top flags, if you like, or top features of Capture One is how you can manipulate color. So there's a few color tools thrown in there. There's the color editor, which we'll look at in a second. There's the color balance tool, which hopefully we can take a little sneaky look at later as well. But we re-engineered the basic color tool because it was one of those tools which I always kind of bypass. So I'd come to the color editor and say, there's a basic section, but don't worry about that. Go straight to advanced because the basic really didn't work in a very nice way. Now it does, which was an update in Capture One 20. Now looking at it, it's fairly intuitive how it works. You can see a bunch of different color swatches. So I can either grab my little picker here and say, I want to adjust the reds. So click on the reds, red color patch is picked. The sliders actually change color, which is a nice little graphical hint to what's going to happen. So I know if I go in this direction, the reds are going to get darker. If I go in this direction, they're going to get brighter. And these different color ranges have been tuned quite carefully so they kind of tie nicely to skin tones and a few other common things that you might want to edit. To improve on that, you can also grab this little picker, click on your desired tone. So let's go to the fruit in the middle here. Momentarily, you might have missed it, but you see little crosshair pops up. And if I start dragging my cursor to the left, you see that changes the lightness of the color tone I picked on. Now, the cool thing is Capture One can also pick out, you'll see if you watch the two color patches over here, when I click and hold, it can pick out more than one color tone. So it will combine those two together.
Right. So it's choosing a kind of color palette based around the initial.
Palette, what I picked on.
That's
exactly.
Cool.
So if I go left and right, I get lightness. If I go up and down, then I can play with the saturation. So it means you're not watching the tool, you're watching the photo to kind of judge how you want to edit it. Now for the hue slider, that's the third axis. We've only got two axes on our mouse or pen. So with a modifier key, Alt, then I can click and then I can modify the hue, as you can see. So before, the basic color editor was extremely basic, and as I said, I just tended to tell people to wash past it and not use it. But now it's actually a really nice usable tool. But the good thing is, let's just reset that, you still have the ability to go advanced, which on first glance can be intimidating because unlike this kind of tool where everything is lit up and it looks fairly obvious what you need to do to make something happen, the advanced tool is kind of, if you like, throwing the cards back in your favor. So it gives you much more control, but the onus is on you to set it up as you wish. But the benefit really is that you can choose incredibly small color ranges to edit, or you can choose incredibly broad color ranges to edit. So if I wanted to edit 5 color tones at a time, I could. If I wanted to edit just a tiny range at a time, I could. And once you really know how to use it, it's really quite fantastic. So with our little picker here, if we do the same example with our red seeds, Capture One tells you, okay, this is the color range that I think you probably want to edit. So it's an estimate. Now, without being some kind of color genius, you don't really know what that means in relation to the photo. But if we turn on this little button here, view selected color range, then everything goes to monochrome, which is part of that selection. So straight away I can see, okay, it's kind of all the seeds and stuff. Now, if I wanted to broaden that, I can just sneak into the next neighboring color. So now I'm picking up seeds, fruit, and so on. Probably if I went in this direction, we're not going to see much of a change because we're picking up all the reds and there's no kind of pinks, purples, or whatever we're sneaking into. If you wanted to be really specific, so if we just zoom into one of these guys, let's go even closer. So if I really squeeze down our range, then we can really nail it. Now, the additional kind of access you get with the advanced color editor is that in basic, you're always picking up the entire saturation range of your chosen color. So if I pick reds, I get reds from very little saturation all the way to the max.
Yeah.
So with the advanced editor, we can say, well, I only want the most saturated reds, or I want the entire range. So by pulling it in this direction, you can see it starts to disappear the selection because we've cut out the lower saturation range. It's hard to say. Like so. So it can be a tiny range, or of course we can sneak into its neighboring colors. So it really
That's
is
cool.
very
I have to admit, when I don't do a lot of color work, it's not one of my strong parts of my photography. And when I first saw that tool, especially when it's in its empty state like it is right now, you're like, oh, it doesn't even do anything. It's kind of broken.
Yeah,
but
rubbish.
when I saw when I saw you just manipulating the shape of the pizza slice, for want of a better word, on that color wheel, just that confidence it gives you that you're only adjusting colors on. For that last image, it was literally you were only adjusting the color tone of the shadows of those pomegranates. It's phenomenal control, and for me, it just gave me so much confidence to touch color in a way that I hadn't thought I was good enough to do in the past.
Yeah, because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to edit a color and then it affecting parts that you don't want, messing that up. Then you're just
suddenly your plate's not a white plate anymore, or something like that. So and I love the way that ability to turn it monochrome except for the color. You're just the confidence it gives you when you're working on an image, I think is awesome.
Exactly what you edit. And important to point out that it's not just one color pick. If I wanted to play around with the greens or whatever, then that can be an entirely separate one. The plate might have a little tinge of something in it. Yeah, so then we could take the cast out of that and so on. So I can do 30 different selections, which is normally more than enough.
I've only ever done one. So those three items below the color wheel there with the check marks, are those the three different selections?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's awesome.
So then you can turn them on and off, and it gives you, I don't really pay much attention to this, but it's kind of just a visual overview of what each color pick has done. So it has a delta change of this much hue, this much saturation, or this much lightness. So that was our delta saturation of the kind of cast in the plate. Yeah.
Here's a feature request for the next one. Give us the ability to name those three selections there. That would be
would be cool.
So you could see pomegranate, plate, table.
You could always
asking for more.
Yeah,
always asking for more. That's cool. That's awesome. Lots of questions coming in, but keen to let you go finish on what you're doing.
Yeah, I was just going to show you a practical example, which is maybe a bit more applicable to all. So blue sky. If we were to use the basic color editor, I could click on the blue and then say I want to make this a bit darker, and then maybe I want to saturate it a bit more, postcard blue sky. But it's also affecting the top of the river, which may or may not be what you want to do. But if it's not, then it's easy to say pick the blue sky once again. So if I make this darker and a bit more saturated, and then say, well, let's cut out those lower saturated tones, then we can kind of just get it into that point so it's not affecting the water so much.
Yep.
That little dot is your picked color. It doesn't have any effect if I move it. It's just showing, okay, that's the color tone.
Starting point.
Yeah. So you know the sort of range that you might want to shape. So the further I go up, the sort of more it's going to creep up and down the sky. And you shouldn't get a nasty cutoff point, because we thought of that too, because there's no posterization, because this furry or fuzzy stuff around the range, that's how it rolls off into the neighboring colors. So if I did that to 0, you see now it's a really hard cutoff. And look here, it's starting to look not so pleasant. But if we do that, then it will roll off nicely into the neighboring colors. So then we don't get any posterization, and then it's totally seamless into the next color tone.
Yeah. And then in that image, dead easy to punch the red on the...
Yeah, so then if we wanted Roosevelt Island, we could grab another pick. That's a fairly saturated red, as you can tell, so we could make that a little bit darker, more saturated. If we wanted to avoid the skin tones, then we could probably safely do that, so it was targeted just to the red paint of the cable car.
Can you now do a before and after on that? People are asking if you can do a before and after when you do some tweaks,
sure.
just to show the extent of what you're doing. Yeah, look at that.
That's just the color editor. So
yeah, a lot of enhancement just in the color. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, and I probably wouldn't do it that much in reality, but as it might be a little bit over the top, but probably something more like that. Yeah.
That's great.
Cool.
Okay, and you go on to the next thing.
Yeah, as we were talking about the color editor, because it's split into three, it seems a shame not to mention this guy, which is purely targeted towards editing skin tones. It works in a similar way to the advanced editor, except the adjustments are kind of much more finer. So the range kind of, if you make adjustment on the hue slider, it would have much less effect than the advanced tab. So it's kind of toned down a bit to be much more subtle. But the super awesome thing is the uniformity sliders, which really kind of gives you the ability to make skin tones as uniform as you wish. So it could be totally uniform, or it could be somewhat uniform, because we all have some variations, apart from me and Alastair, who are perfect, of course.
I'm just like, pasty white. That's nothing.
You see, this guy has a noticeable difference in tone from his nose, probably because it's freezing cold.
That's why he's holding a polar bear, right?
Exactly, holding a polar bear in his jacket. Between his cheeks, his nose, probably his hand as well. And everyone's hands tend to have a different skin tone as well. Just depending if you're tanned, if you're cold, if you're in a cold studio, models, male and female, look at their hands, tends to be quite a vastly different skin tone. So what we can do with this nifty little guy is grab the color picker and say, this is my target skin tone. So if I said somewhere around there, again, you get a range suggestion. Now, the idea here is to try and, if you like, fish for all the bad skin tones. So we want to kind of create a range which has all the possible skin tones. Again, we can turn on this guy and then everything will go to monochrome, which is not part of it. Now, this is quite a handy shot because he's wearing a, brightly colored jacket, which is not even close to his skin tone. Yeah. But so we can see exactly what's part of it. And then if we turn that off, what the hue does, which is really quite elegant, but very powerful and very difficult to do if you wouldn't know how to do it in Photoshop, is essentially to take every color in this range and convert it to the one that I picked earlier. So as I drag hue across, then you see his nose is now the same color as whatever my pick color is. Now, obviously, if that was too much, then you would moderate it to what you felt acceptable, and you can do the same for saturation, same for lightness, which would kind of flatten off the lighting, but at least hue, you could balance that up nicely. Now, it probably hasn't had much of his hand, but if we made our range bigger, then you can see the difference, what's going on. Now, we'd have to be careful because then we're sneaking into his coat, but that's something we could also deal with a layer. We could just make a layer just for his skin tone wherever we wanted to have that. But it's a really super nice tool just for evening up skin tones. Quite
Can
nice.
I just tell you, I just got super mad because I just realized if I had this tool years ago, it would have saved me so much time.
Definitely for headshots. And yeah.
No, because obviously I spent 16 years as a wedding photographer before joining SmugMug, and almost every wedding that I would edit, and some of the shots I would have to edit a lot of skin tone, but a lot of my clients would suffer sometimes. When they get nervous, they get rashes, red rash and that type of stuff. This would have been so good at being able to get rid of that. that element, which was, when using the early versions of Photoshop was really tough to get rid of those color ranges and stuff. This would have been so good to have back then.
So if we wanted to do, just a quick and dirty mask, if we wanted to really make sure it was just on the skin, that would be easy. Wouldn't have to finesse it much. Same process. Pick his nice skin tone. Make this as... We could go really wide now because the layer is only going to affect his skin, and then bring uniformity across. Saturation, if we did everything, obviously that removes any nice modeling that we might have. And the cool thing is, because it's on a layer, we can turn that on and off. So if we look at his nose, and this is more of an extreme correction, but you get the idea. And each layer, we can then bring the opacity down and then decide where we want to set it. So if that's full normalization of the skin, which sometimes looks too good. No one has perfectly even toned skin, unless it's a beauty shot, of course, which you're striving for. But at portrait headshot, there's normally some variation, but of course you can moderate that quite nicely with opacity as well, or just ramping down how much uniformity you want to have too. So you got loads of flexibility there to play with.
It's so quick because you're not having, when you're painting in the layer mask and stuff, there's no accuracy needed.
No, not really, because the dog isn't going to be affected because it's nowhere near this.
Oh, it's a dog. It's not a polar bear. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a dog. Yeah. His jacket, I might have to be a little bit more careful around here if I was going to extremes, but otherwise you can be, pretty sloppy with it, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of a bride with a white dress against the skin tone. There's no, it's going to be pretty easy to mask that out and get the skin tones the way you want.
Yeah, it never has to be super accurate. I think there was one on possibly Emily's shot. I don't know, maybe not. Yes, but I don't think I'd got round to masking it yet. So that's got a similar pick, and then what we could do is grab a brush, and then we could just paint in wherever we wanted to normalize up the skin. So like so, and then down here you could probably add a bit in and tweak to your heart's content. But her skin tone's pretty even, so the effect isn't going to be quite as dramatic. But when we start looking at these kind of areas over here, and then hands and that kind of stuff, it's really nice what you can do.
Yeah. Right, Dave, I'm going to ask you some questions before I lose track of all these. I'm sure you've got a few other features you want to show us, but let's
questions is fine. Yeah.
Let's go back through some of these questions. Now, the first thing I want to say is I first started personally using Capture One when I switched to shooting Fujifilm cameras, the Fuji X trans sensor, which when they first brought out the X trans sensor, converting that RAW file in anything other than Capture One was pretty horrible. So
it's definitely a big difference. Yeah. Fuji, like their sort of shipped RAW converter, which was a Japanese company called Silky Pix, I think. So that was fairly well optimized for the X trans, but nothing else really had the inside knowledge to know how to decode it properly.
Yep.
So hence seeing these weird artifacts popping up on other applications.
Yeah, definitely used to get a lot of worming. I used to call it, all the worms when I was using Lightroom and stuff. So that's when I switched to it. Randy mentions that's the reason why he switched. He switched to Capture One 2 years ago. Great for my Fujifilm cameras. It is a great RAW converter, especially for some of those kind of unusual sensor algorithms that some of the brands have. Adnan asks, how many healing layers can we have in one image?
So you can have unlimited healing points. So to clarify, so you can see all the little arrows that pop up when I hover my healing brush on the screen. You can see all the different points I've set. By the way, if that becomes annoying, like if you're doing, hundreds of them, you can right click with the brush and say turn that off, and then it gets rid of the little arrows. So unlimited on a layer, and in layers in total, you can have 16 layers.
16 layers.
Now, the only reason why you want to have more than one heal layer is if you wanted to have different opacities of each layer. So if you wanted to dial back the opacity for a healing point, then you make another layer and then bring that back. Like, again, she's not the best example because she doesn't have any, but if I was to make another new heal layer and we wanted to, say, just reduce this area a tiny bit, this might be better with cloning, sort of under there, and then let's just choose that. Then to make that more believable, then we could bring the opacity down, so it was just reducing it a tiny bit, but that's like an opacity of 32%, whereas on this layer, which is what we would use for spots and other stuff, we want that at 100%. So that's why I would divide up my heal layers, and then the maximum layers you can have is 16. It's pretty hard to max that out generally in Capture One with the kind of tasks you're doing. The reason why it's limited to 16 is really for performance. So as you can imagine, as the layers grow and it's all raw conversion throughout that stack, then it's quite a lot of maths going on and heavy lifting. So if it was 50 layers, then it would impact the performance in quite a big way.
Cool. Roger asks, could you please ask about the learning curve? I'm assuming he means the learning curve probably from moving from another editing product to yours. Actually, it was quite cool. Randy shouted out, check out Dave's videos on the Capture One website. You have a lot of
there is a lot
resources, right?
Yeah, definitely. So what I can suggest is, well, actually, if we go to where is it? Resource Hub. So this is a little in-app window that pops up, and you can go to the tutorials, and that would just take you to the Learning Hub, which is feeding in from YouTube. So you can go to our Learning Hub, or you can go to YouTube. But I would simply start with watching. There's 4 videos, if you like, under the banner of Getting Started, which shows you how to import, shows you how to edit, organize to some extent, and then export. But it's all very basic. Remember, you don't have to learn everything right at the start. I was teaching a new colleague of mine just last week, and really I said to him, if you can just play with white balance, exposure, and high dynamic range, it's amazing what you can do with just those 3 tools. So once you've got photos into Capture One, pick 10 of your most favorite shots, and then see what you can do editing wise. And again, you don't have to learn everything straight away. It's more about getting comfortable and, of course, customizing the interface to how it works for you. So compared to, if we draw a comparison to Lightroom, Lightroom has different modules like the library, develop, maps, and so on. Capture One, everything is in kind of one spot as you see it. When you first start Capture One, it will ask you some questions like, where do you want your tools to be? Do you prefer them on the left, or do you prefer them on the right? Where do you want your browser to be? Do you prefer it down below or to the side, and so on? So the startup sequence will help you customize to some extent, but in the view menu, there's a whole load of other options for customization as well. So if you find you're not using something, just get rid of it from the interface and streamline it so it's really working for you and
it's not as daunting
the other way. Yeah.
There's a great comment here. I'm not going to put it on screen because it'll take up the whole screen, but Cameron Weir says, I'd never really heard of Capture One until it was talked about. I think we talked about it. He refers to the episode we had last week with Neil from Nikon School, and we spoke about that. And he says he's seen some amazing results already between what he's seen in Lightroom and Capture One. He's impressed. So could you maybe just talk about the fact you have different products available based on what camera people are using, is that right? Or
exactly.
Products available to them?
So really the full version, which is what we're looking at here, is Capture One Pro. So that supports all the major manufacturers' cameras, so Canon, Nikon, Sony, Olympus, Pentax, etc. Going back a very long time. So even if your camera is 10, 20 years old, there's a good chance it's supported in Capture One. So that's Capture One Pro, supports all manufacturers. So if you shoot Nikon, Canon, Sony, or more than one brand, that makes sense for you. Then we have Capture One for Sony, which only supports Sony cameras. Then we have Capture One for Nikon, which only supports Nikon cameras. Now, they do exactly the same thing as Capture One Pro, except they only support those models. Now, if you only shoot Nikon, or only shoot Sony, or only shoot Fuji, so we have Capture One Fuji film as well, then that saves you a bit of cash because they're at a lower price point. There's also free versions called Capture One Express for Nikon, Sony, and Fujifilm. So they have the same great RAW conversion, but they just have less tools. So only the basic color editor, no layers, no healing, those kinds of things. But if you want to go one step from just shooting JPEG in camera and have some more control, then Express makes perfect sense. So it's a good way to test out the image quality. But every product you can get on a 30-day trial as well. So you can test everything out. Nothing's turned off, no watermarking, none of that stuff. You don't need to give a credit card. You can just download the trial and mess around for 30 days too.
That's cool. Cameron says that he's going to go redo some of his early photo restorations using Capture One. Check it out. So I'm glad that was useful on that episode with Nikon School.
Photo restoration is really... it's much more capable now just because of the healing and the cloning. So scratches, you can just draw a line on it. Spots you can get rid of, all kinds of stuff. So actually a colleague of mine copied all his old family photos from France in the 60s or whatever. And with the color correction, you can tweak the negatives to get good color balance too. So that's a great use for it.
Excellent. And while you're watching, if you're enjoying what you're seeing and Dave's answering your questions the way you would like, give us a thumbs up. It really helps support the channel by giving us a like and a thumbs up on the channel. Thank you for those of you that are doing that. I'm not sure at what point you referenced this, but Adnan asks, can we do other adjustments other than skin tone in the selected area? I'm not sure.
Oh, what, on the same layer? So so this.
Go back to your screen. Yeah.
I think that's what he means. So on this skin tone layer I made, could I do something else?
Yep.
So yes, if we wanted to make that area more contrasty, and I'll just push it dramatically so you can see what's happening. But essentially any layer that you create can have any combination of adjustments on it. So I'm naughty here because I didn't name my layers. So this is a vignette, so that's just darkening the outside slightly. This one I think was that was a contrast boost in this area you see at the front. So that has some contrast, it has the highlights turned down, it has some clarity in structure, and so on. So really any layer can have a massive different adjustments on it. So it's different to Lightroom, which has a principle of an adjustment brush, whereas we're a bit more leaning towards the Photoshop method where you have a layer, you create a mask, and you can create that mask by drawing, by selecting from a color range or a luminosity range, or it can be a radial or a gradient. So there's lots of ways to create that mask. And once you've made that mask, any combination of adjustments can be put onto it.
Yeah.
Hope that makes sense.
Cool. Now give us a thumbs up. So that obviously answered that. Here's a question that I thought was going to be asked today, and if it hadn't been asked, I was going to ask it. Stefan says, looks an amazing piece of software, but difficult to leave Lightroom and have to start all over again, learning wise. And this is something I was going to bring up. For many years, I was entrenched, for want of a better word, in Lightroom, and it did take a lot of effort and focus to switch over to Capture One. Is there anything you can advise people on how to make that leap? Is there a way to make it as pain-free as possible coming from Lightroom over to Capture One?
Well, I think what you have to remember is that if you decide tomorrow, I'm going to buy Capture One, which would be great, that doesn't mean you instantly have to stop using Lightroom. Like, it doesn't have to be this kind of hard cutoff. So as I said, you've got 30 days in that trial. So pick 15 shots that could be your favorite or the hardest to edit or whatever, and then put them into Capture One, and then just play and experiment and learn how to do things. And as your confidence grows, then you can think, right, I'm going to do a job or a task or a project just in Capture One. And then when you've come to that point, then you can decide, all right, now I want to, from this day on, I will only use Capture One. Now, of course, if you're a Creative Cloud subscriber or whatever, then you might be using Photoshop as well. So again, it's not like it's a hard stop of Lightroom. You can also import your Lightroom catalog. So you can say file import Lightroom catalog. That doesn't mess up your existing Lightroom catalog. Very important to state that. Capture One is simply reading it and then making a Capture One version of that. But it doesn't duplicate the raw files or any of those things. It's just Capture One's way of building its own database to access it. And we can bring in some adjustments like cropping, rotation, metadata, exposure, white balance, just those basic things. So if you do have a catalog, you wouldn't necessarily have to re-engineer everything all over again. So it's also a consideration of what's the pain alongside of it, because it's always painful learning new software, as we all know. But what's the benefit I get out of it? Will I be able to edit faster? Will I get the results I want quicker? Do I get better results? Do I have more fun, which is also important? Is it, a pleasant experience? Am I not mad at the screen for not doing what I want it to do? So there's also that mental consideration to have as well. Now, if I got fired tomorrow, fingers crossed I wouldn't, I personally would stick with Capture One because I just enjoy the whole editing process, the layers workflow, not having to switch between those different modules, just having everything there as I access it. And in terms of managing my database, I've got all the same potential as other applications too. So I can search pictures, categorize them as I want, organize them as I wish, and so on. So I don't lose anything, I just have much more to gain.
I certainly did the dual thing where still using Lightroom while learning Capture One, and the resources we spoke about earlier, the Learning Hub and all the live streams that you do and the videos that you do. And I have to admit, the ability that I personally have to phone Dave up and ask him a question. It was really just really worth taking the time to learn all those techniques and ideas. And what I found was, like any piece of software, it looks really daunting at first because you're seeing everything it does. But when you analyze, what you actually use in Photoshop and what you actually use in Lightroom, typically it's just a small part of the feature set. So just find those similar things in Capture One that you've been using in Lightroom and hone down on those. Now, you mentioned cataloging.
Yeah.
What is the scope of cataloging in Capture One these days?
It's nigh identical to Lightroom or other applications, really. To give you this example, this is my little demo catalog. Let's just collapse some stuff down so you can see. The library has managed everything in the first tool tab. These are called tool tabs, which contain various different tools. The first one is devoted to your catalog management, if you like. So if I start kind of at the bottom, this just shows me my complete folder tree of where everything is stored. So these are folders I have on this little external hard drive. And of course, I can pick any of these folders up and go straight to the contents of those shots. So that's, again, no different to really how Lightroom does it or other cataloging applications. What's also cool is that I can make virtual collections. So before Al and I came on live, I just made a quick project called SmugMug with a bunch of photos in it. I've got various different Capture One webinars, all as different projects as well. So in terms of organization, it's actually really powerful and simple to use. Everything's just drag and drop, nothing complicated about it, all pretty straightforward.
It's great because it used to be just a kind of standalone editor without the cataloging capabilities of Lightroom, and that kind of hindered people for some years taking the big leap. But now that you have your entire catalog there and can import it as is, it's a great start.
That takes a big barrier away for sure.
Absolutely.
And we have a completely different method of of managing your files called a session, which is almost like an encapsulated project. So if I was going to go into the studio tomorrow and shoot, then I would create a session because it keeps everything kind of bundled up into one project. So you've got the flexibility of catalogs and sessions, or if you don't like the sound of either of those, you can just use Capture One Light Bridge and browse your existing folder structure if you wish. So you've got 3 file management options to pick from.
Right, I think we'll jump back to some of your features, but before we do, Emily asks, David, do you have a favorite feature in Capture One that you use the most?
Favorite feature is
the delete tool, right?
Delete, yeah. This is crap. I hate all my work. Yeah, it's probably layers. Really, I don't think I edit anything without throwing some kind of layer onto it. So this, just to give you an example, this is a edited shot. Let's just make it different. It's not my shot. It's from a great guy called, Kevin, don't you? Kevin Treadwell from the Flash Center. Yep. So lovely shot of a kingfisher. How it looks out of camera is this. Looks pretty good out of camera. So really the editing here is just, it's an enhancement. It's not fixing anything. But the ability to split things up into layers just mentally helps me edit very much. So if I hit M on my keyboard, you can see the mask is in red. So we've got a mask just for the background. I've got a little tiny mask. If I look, we can actually look at a grayscale mask. So that's the background. That's the grayscale mask of just lightening him up a bit. And then that's a mask of just the bird and a bit more up here as well. So splitting a shot up into layers makes a lot of sense to me. I'm old enough, unfortunately, to have started in the dark room. So I was very used to dodging, burning, all of that kind of stuff. So the ability to make layers and dodge and burn with enormous flexibility and ease is I guess, Emily, my favorite feature.
Yeah. I'm too young. I've never been in a dark room. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right.
It's dark and it smells.
There's actually been a few requests for you to highlight a feature, which is the cloning feature, which I think you were going to get to anyway, which is relatively new, right?
Yeah, cloning was new. Actually, let's grab a picture of me because that has a bad example. This was actually when we were last together, Al.
This is your squinch. Your squinch shot. You got Hurleyed.
I got Peter Hurleyed. Yeah. So let's just do a virtual copy of this. So let's get rid of this layer, and let's get rid of that layer. So this is day 3 of Las Vegas. So obviously weariness is starting to show. So as well as healing, we can clone. So the difference between heal and clone is that we've got our heal layer here, so that just gets rid of some muck and stuff. And what heal does is that it will blend the luminosity. So if we're grabbing, sample from here to put over there, then it will make sure that the luminosity and color is blended, so it's a good fit. With cloning, it's just a like for like copy, copying some pixels. So if I grab the clone tool, the difference with the clone tool is that you have to tell Capture One the source point, and it's the same as Photoshop. So it's Alt key, say I want to copy pixels from here. So if I do this kind of thing, this is not going to look very believable as yet, but if we copy some pixels from there, the great thing is I can then take the opacity down, so that's 3 days of Vegas to 1 day of Vegas, something like that. So the clone really is just that like for like copy. I've also used it for copying catch lights on eyes, like if you miss a catch light on an eye and you just want to pop a catch light in, then I've just cloned it from one side to the other. So I think I did that with This guy, if I had the edited version. So this is 100 megapixels, so it's going to look enormous on the screen. So I think for this one, this clone layer, did I? Yeah, so we've got a catch light here, but no catch light there. So this just has a simple clone. If we actually select the clone tool, it's just cloning from here to here, just so we can get a catch light in, which is quite handy. So that's been my sort of use case really for the clone tool, reducing tiredness, borrowing.
That file there, I can tell that's from a GFX 100, right?
It is a GFX 100, yeah.
The resolution is phenomenal, and the .raf file gives it away. But there you
go.
Yeah. Incredible resolution in that camera.
Yeah.
Randy asks, you mentioned luminosity there, but do you see Capture One adding even more control for luminosity in layers to keep us from having to use plugins in Photoshop?
Depends what Randy wants, I guess. There's potential to try and tie luminosity and color together. That's one way to look at it. But in terms of luminosity masking, I'm going to throw a filled layer on here. So a filled layer is like an adjustment layer in Photoshop. It goes over the whole shot. And then this is our grayscale mask. And then any mask can have some kind of luminosity constraint put over it. So if we punch Luma range and say, I just want to have midtones and shadows, then we can get something along those lines. So the white area is just the masked area. But maybe what Randy is missing is that, and it's don't often realize it, is that these two sliders underneath are inactive by default. So radius is on 0. So the additional part you can do with Luma range is to bump up the radius, and this will have some control over how the edges look. So with sensitivity at 0, it's going to feather it, which is quite good for selecting skin tone based on luminosity. If we go in the other direction, it will refine it and kind of tightly hug all the edges. So if you've discovered Luma range but haven't understood what these two do, then that can add an extra dimension to the masking as well. So hopefully that helps. But right now we can make masks with luminosity, with color, by drawing them, with radial masks, with gradient masks. So I guess one step would be improving selection techniques, tying those together and so on. But really the sky is the limit, and it's down to what's possible from a technical perspective, how long it takes and who wants it. Yep. I guess is the top 3 of product management.
There's a couple of questions regarding camera profiles.
Yep.
Roger asked, is it compatible with X-Rite Color Check custom camera profiles?
It is. There is a little application from X-Rite that allows you to do a custom profile. I would say don't think it's something that is mandatory, because we spend quite a lot of time in Capture One building the color profiles anyway. Mm-hmm. They're built by hand. So even though we shoot a color target as step 1, we then shoot about 700 shots per camera and full ISO sweeps. Yep. To then optimize color, noise reduction, sharpness, and so on, to then kind of tailor make that profile. So don't think I must start by making a custom profile. Actually do some shots, see what you think of the color. If you're not happy with it, let us know, because we can always tweak and improve it. But don't necessarily think that's something that is a requirement. I would say if you're shooting artwork in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and you've got to be color specific, then it makes sense to do a custom profile because your lighting is constant. But trying to do a custom profile for a camera that shoots indoors, outdoors, people, landscapes, and so on, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, there was another question asking if you supported older cameras. Cameron has a D3200 with a couple of
pretty
lenses.
Sure that's supported. If you Google Capture One supported cameras, takes you to the right bit of the website, and then you can see what's what.
There you go. Yeah. Right, I'm going to ask you to show me maybe a couple more features. Before we do that, you okay for time, Dave?
Yeah. What time is it? We're 5 past.
Yeah, we're just after the hour. But before we ask Dave to show us a little bit more, I'm going to ask you to hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell notification. That really helps support us here on the channel, and make sure that you don't miss an episode whenever we release another SmugMug Live. But let's see what Dave has up his sleeve for the next feature.
Well, I guess I've kind of been playing around with it a bit, because that was our luminosity masking, if you like, which built that mask in a snap, which was nice and speedy, which is a relatively advanced technique, but it didn't take very long to do it, and then we've gone from that to that quite nicely. So even though that's a pretty hazy, flat, low contrast shot, there's tons of potential in there. I mean, it's almost hard to really see what's going on, but really doesn't take long to liberate the detail with just a few clicks here and there. So that's an example of, if you like, more of an extreme feature. But to kind of dial back to something that's kind of more applicable for everyone on a daily basis, I'm just going to reset this to 0. So that's how it came out of camera, is actually this one, high dynamic range, which is a bit of a weird name, I would say, in Capture One, because this doesn't relate to blending images together and that stuff. It's kind of really dealing with both ends of the tonal range, but it gives you lots and lots of control. So if we were to edit this shot, I think it's probably a bit too cold, so let's warm it up a bit. We do have a great levels tool, which is very similar to how Photoshop works, but in this case I can just hit auto, which is the magic wand, and it sets my shadow and highlight points nicely. And really what the high dynamic range tool does is deal with the darker ends and the brighter ends, but it gives you loads of flexibility. So with this guy, if I was to finish editing this, I'd probably have a bit of clarity and maybe a bit more contrast, but now he's kind of darkening up a bit too much. So traditionally you'd think, okay, I could open up the shadows and you can see what the shadows are doing. And if we look at the histogram, you can see that lower 2/3 kind of wiggling along to the mid-range. But I could feel it's having a bit too much of effect, because it's also changing the trees in the background, which I feel are actually pretty good as they are. So in comes these two, the blacks and the whites. If we lift up the blacks, you can see it's super targeted just to the darkest ranges. So I would say if I wanted to edit this properly, I would just bring up my blacks a little and shadows a tiny bit. And same principle with highlights and whites. Let's zoom out. If I play with the highlights, you can see it's affecting the sky, the snow in the front, and so on. So it's got quite a broad effect. Whereas if we take the whites, it's just targeted to really those brighter tones. So the combination of these four is actually really powerful. And if you kind of gave yourself a task to edit every photo with just these two tools, you could actually do a lot and get some really nice results. It's just sometimes it's not immediately obvious. Well, what's the difference between a highlight and a white? Isn't that the same thing? Essentially, except white is just really targeted, black is really targeted. These two are slightly broader range.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of some of the things in Capture One that they're not revolutionary, but what they are is super finessed. Just the control you have over some of the other software is just so precise, and I think that's what a lot of us love, is just that.
Definitely.
It's not doing anything radical, but it just does it really well.
Nice, nice job of it. Like with this shot, if we lift the shadows, it kind of brightens the grass and the sky a bit, which I don't want. But if I pull up the blacks, then it's really just this spot. So I can get the kind of look and feel I want, which works nicely. And often a good technique is if you've lifted the shadows, you can darken the blacks, and that gives you like a really nice rich contrast as well. So even as opposites, which is kind of a bit of a weird thought at first, it works really nicely.
Excellent. I think we've been making our way through many of, or most of the questions. There is an elephant in the room, apparently. Randy,
literally.
I don't know. Randy asks, the elephant in the room, when will Capture One have a mobile app?
Unfortunately, it's very rare we actually reveal anything about the future roadmap. We did a little bit with the last update of Capture 120. But I think my best advice is if you want to see a feature, whether that's mobile or you name it, anything else on the list of requests, then if you go to support.capture1.com, you can raise a support ticket under the banner of a feature request and just send that in. You might not necessarily get a personal response, but anything that comes in like that is kind of thrown into an application that gathers feedback from the community. So it's not a waste of time doing it. It's well worth kind of putting your vote in that respect. But you can say mobile is obviously, it's the future. iPads are becoming super powerful. Android tablets becoming really powerful. People are using mobile devices a lot more. So all these kind of future things are definitely on our radar as well. There isn't one thing that we're not looking at. It's, of course, a case of what makes sense to build into the next release, the release after that.
What the priorities are.
And the priorities, yeah.
That's okay. Yeah. You made Randy happy early because he hadn't found the slider and the luminosity that you mentioned, so that was good.
Yeah, that's
the radius one. He says, "I'll find the radius one." So that's
really makes all the difference for anything that you're. Oh, there's a black and white version. Anything that you want to do for fine tuning, edge work, and everything. It's definitely really important. Yeah.
Cool. I think I'm just going through the questions to see if we've missed anything. Oh, there was, in fact, Randy had a question earlier that I skipped over. He was asking if there's an easy way or a better way to clear filters such as colors, ratings, etc., instead of clicking the tiny X in the search window.
The teeny tiny X. Good. I don't know if it's a shortcut, actually. Let's type filter. Or clear. No, but it would kind of make sense, wouldn't it? So star. I don't think there is actually. No. But that could be an interesting thing to do. So right now, yeah, if you do have a bunch of filters, you have to hit the little X like so. But some kind of shortcut, which I don't think exists, would be nice, unless it's called reset. Let's have a look. Reset. No, you're out of luck, I'm afraid, Randy. Yeah. But it's a good suggestion.
Yeah, sure. There's always one question we get you with. That's good. Yeah. So we found the one that we can't answer. And people are still throwing in questions. We're about to wrap up, so we'll get those questions. But Cameron asked, is Capture One easy to get to grips with a tablet, like a Wacom tablet or something? It's as easy as everything. Yeah, you never see Dave without that pencil in his hand.
The pen. And really, there's nothing to do for setup. The only thing I change on mine is I make the front button the scroll button. So if I want to scroll up and down the thumbnails, I can do so. But really, everything else is default.
Yep.
So I wouldn't be without it personally. Now, of course, you could set up all the express wheels for shortcuts and things, but to be honest, I don't. So I'm so used to using left hand on the keyboard, right hand with the Wacom. That's kind of enough to navigate around everything.
Yeah, first thing I do with my pen is turn off the buttons.
Yeah,
my big clumsy hands are forever touching these buttons. So the first thing I do is make them not do anything. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
I have right click, but I rarely use that because I tend to hit control on the keyboard. I'm used to just hitting control on the keyboard to get up any sub option that Capture One might have. So yeah, really it's just scroll that I use because I find that quite useful. But otherwise, it's as default as it came out of the box.
Cool. I've got one other request for you. It's not a question, but Chile says that they're migrating to Capture One now. Nice. I would like to suggest that Capture One give you the ability to change all metadata, XF, etc. I've had to use a command line in an XF tool to fix it. Can you change the metadata?
Yeah, you can change. So the creator for this is Lena Polk, for example. And if I wanted to apply that to everything else, let's just select everything else. And let's say I'd done a bunch of other stuff. Just click the little copy apply button up here, and then say apply, and then that will be copied over to everything else.
Can you remove it that easily as well if you wanted to remove an item from all your?
So if I select all, I can also reset, and that will remove everything and go back to the default. So now it's picked up Emily's again on that one. Yeah. So, but to remove just one item, you would not be able to do that. No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they were specifically asking about removing some personal info.
One thing that they might want to check is when you export using a process recipe, you can also decide what metadata you want to include in the JPEG, TIFF, etc. So if you don't want people to know what camera you shoot, or other metadata or ratings, you can decide on the process recipe what that should have. So that could be an option too.
Yeah. So maybe not the deep control you were hoping for, but there are some controls there.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to mention to those of you that are considering using one of our products, and specifically if you're thinking of joining SmugMug, for those of you that are starting trials in SmugMug just now and thinking of choosing one of our SmugMug plans, we currently actually have an offer for our new customers together with Capture One, a little bit of incentive for you to start a new SmugMug account. At the moment you will get 35% discount off of Capture One if you start a new SmugMug account. So that's a little bit of incentive. If you're on our Flickr platform, then we are bringing out later this month an offer to encourage you to check out Flickr Pro. So stay tuned for that offer that's coming out later this month, and I'll be sure to let you know. But there'll be a little bit of incentive if you want to join SmugMug and get a SmugMug account. And if you want to upgrade to Flickr Pro, there'll be incentive to get some discount off Capture One. That's great. Jilly says, I'm joining SmugMug too. Awesome. So it's a nice way to end what was meant to be an hour, but we're an hour and 20. But there we go. So that's awesome. Dave, thank you so much for today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
Did we cover everything you wanted to cover, or did we have to have you back?
More than enough. Happy to come back. To show every facet of Capture One, we need 3-4 hours maybe, but just to show some of the potential is great. Yeah,
well, I've got nothing else to do, so we can stay for a while. But it is getting late here, and it's time to go do some fatherly chores like get kids ready for bed and stuff. So David, thank you so much for joining. I hope everybody's enjoyed some of that insight into Capture 120 and some of the newer features there. As we've mentioned throughout this episode, there's loads of tuition online, both from David and Capture One, but obviously from other sources as well. But there's a great built-in learning center there right in the product. So Cameron's saying we have to have David back. Oh, well, there you go. We have to have you back, dude. So,
there we go.
it's always a pleasure. As I've said, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell notification, give us a thumbs up, give us a like in the little like icon on the channel. That really helps support us here on the channel, and we appreciate all your support. We thank you for tuning in from all over the world. We literally had all four corners of a sphere join us today. So thank you everybody for your time, and we will see you later this week. As I mentioned, on Thursday I will be joined by the incredible Matthew Jordan Smith. He's joining me from Tokyo, and he's photographed everybody from Oprah to Tanya Banks to Samuel Jackson, you name it, he's photographed them, as well as some incredible personal projects, and he's got some exhibitions coming up. So I'm going to have a great chat with him on Thursday. Join us. It's an early one for those of you in the US, 7 a.m. Pacific time. It's 10 a.m. in the East Coast, 3 p.m. Very manageable for me here in Scotland. I think it's the same time for you down in England, Dave, so you can join in. Yeah, I think we're on the same time zone. But thank you for today. Again, David, thank you so much. We'll see you all back here on Thursday. Wherever you are in the world, folks, stay safe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Thanks, Dave.
Goodbye.